right. For a couple more people to come back in. I want to welcome everybody to the Maryland Online webinar series. If you can, please mute your microphones. I may mute you manually, so just be aware of that in case you are talking and nobody's hearing you. This webinar is one of several professional development webinars that are hosted by Maryland Online. You will automatically be on the email list if you register, so you can get information about future events. We don't send too much email, but if you do feel like you want to be taken off the list, just let me know. I'll pull you right off. It's pretty low tech. I maintain it myself. Please put your questions in the chat box. Throughout the presentation, I will go ahead and try to insert them, and we will also allow questions at the end of the session as well. Oh, Julie, you're going to have to, I'm sorry, Julie, you're going to have to log out and log back in. The recording is going to be available as well as the slides. We will send all that information to you. It's actually going to be on Maryland Online YouTube channel. There are some other great webinars that are on there as well right now if you'd like to check those out. And again, you'll get all that information if you in an email after this. And if you have a particular topic of interest you'd like to see us do a webinar on, and or you are a presenter and would like to present something, send me an email. We're always looking for new and fresh ideas to go ahead and put up for spring. Right now, we're creating the schedule for spring, and I'd be happy to entertain any ideas that you all have. And with that, I am going to welcome you to the Teaching with the UN's Sustainable Goals webinar, presented by David Buck, who is a professor of English at Howard Community College and one of our favorite presenters. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Okay, thank you. Let me just make sure everything's going here. Okay, so welcome. I'm really happy that Wendy and Julie have asked me to present this topic. This is a very interesting topic, a little bit off the beaten path of the typical online learning webinars that we would see in our professional experiences. But I think there's a lot to be said about this topic and these goals that hopefully I'll be able to explain as I go through. So as you see on the screen, there are 17 sustainable development goals established by the United Nations. And I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but we'll talk about them in the discussion of curriculum or content development. The first thing that I want you to know is this presentation is Creative Commons license, so you can use this whatever you want to do. It's under an attribution license. Also, one of the major questions is always, you know, can I get to the slides? Can I get the presentation? If you see the tiny URL link there at the bottom of this screen, it's just tinyurl.com/teach SDGs. And you can have my presentation and use however you see fit for that. Okay, I'll also put this link at the bottom of my last slide. So if you don't catch it, we'll make sure that you get it again. First of all, thanks for being here. I know November is a very difficult month for us in higher education and in teaching. So I realize that papers are in, exams are coming in, the semester's ending. I just want to remind ourselves and me that if we are as stressed and anxious, so are our students. So I'm always reminding myself that I think I have it tough. Our students sometimes have it even worse than we do. So anyway, thanks for being here, and hopefully today will be a meaningful use of your time. I hate to waste anyone's time because I know your time is quite valuable. I've always said a disclaimer in any presentation that I make. Now I'm making it a slide in all of my presentations, which is this: I am not an expert. I'm in my 20th year of full-time teaching in that capacity. In those 20 years, I failed more than I've succeeded. But I see my classroom, especially my online classroom, as a laboratory to experiment with ideas. And so I try my best to take an idea and see if I can use it and constantly trying to give my students a better experience. But I am not a UN expert. I am not an SDG expert. I'm not a sustainability expert. I'm just a guy, and I'm just telling you what I'm trying to do in my classroom with these SDGs. So the first thing we want to talk about is just what are the SDGs. Now, I think in Wendy's description of this webinar, she also put in the description from the UN. And basically, the United Nations member states in 2015 came up with these Sustainable Development Goals to share this blueprint for peace, prosperity, for people, the planet, our future. So at its heart are these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and it's basically an urgent call for action, right? From all the countries that are part of the UN member state, both developed and developing, as a global partnership to connect with these things. The first idea that I like to recognize is that it's not only these SDGs are designed or established to end poverty, other deprivations, but also improving things like health, education, reduce inequality, spur economic growth. So there's this idea of the SDGs, and you see these, and sometimes my students go straight for the environment, the climate action, the life below water, which are critical goals, but these goals are really agile. And I'll get to this in a little bit when we talk about using these SDGs in any discipline at our institutions and in our classrooms. They're quite agile, and I think there's some potential there for these goals that really make them quite meaningful, even though this idea of making our world a better place by 2030 is a huge goal, to say the least. So what are the SDGs? If you go to the granular level of these 17 goals, basically what the UN's charter is to help sustainable development, but look at development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to also meet their needs. So it's this idea of what we do now pays dividends, or there's a return on investment in the future for our future generations. So when I look at my kids, I'm thinking what we do now development-wise has to be sustainable enough that allows them the same opportunities that I have, or my parents or grandparents had. The UN looks at sustainable development in 3 dimensions or core elements: economic growth, social inclusion, environmental protection. And if you think of it again, these dimensions encompass most of what we do in our classrooms, regardless of the discipline. Further, going deeper into the SDGs, this is also a way to look at them as the 5 Ps for sustainable development. And what does sustainable development affect, and who needs to be involved? So you have the people, the planet, the prosperity, peace, and partnership. And that last goal, the goal 17, is this partnership for the goals. There has to be social inclusion, a community. And you'll hear me say that a lot when we're looking at these goals. But if you look at these 5 Ps, again, we can place most of these ideas into our teaching. And I will get to this in a little bit, but also these 5 Ps help our students become aware and become developed as global citizens, in that they are not just on our campuses to achieve a higher education, but they're here to also develop as individuals that will also go out and affect others. And so I think it's really interesting when we look at these SDGs in these 5 dimensions and 5 elements here, as improving not only our students' lives, but the communities in which they live and from which they come. So what inspired this project that I'm going to tell you about? I am a hack, so I like to hack things that I see and steal people's ideas and use them for my own. So the first inspiration is Montgomery College's Open Pedagogy Fellowship that's being run by Dr. Mike Mills and Professor Shinta Hernandez. This pedagogy fellowship is that Montgomery College pays professors to work together and collaborate and build renewable assignments that are based on the SDGs. This project has gotten a lot of good attention. They were even mentioned at a UN session for their work in this open pedagogy. And open pedagogy is basically students creating products that live under a Creative Commons license so that they can be shared out. So I love to steal ideas from Mike and Shinta, and this is one of them that I stole. So instead of creating 1 or 2 assignments that are based on the SDGs, I went ahead and said, what if I changed my entire curriculum to be the SDGs? So that's kind of what I've done, built off of the shoulders of Mike and Shinta. The other inspiration is our Green Teaching program at Howard Community College. Now, that is a group that we've created where professors and staff members can become certified in what we call a Green Professor Certification. And what this means is that these professors and staff members commit to adopt a greener style of work or teaching, promote awareness of the environment and the effects that our students have, the effects of a college education. And this could be as simple as teaching in a room and turning off the lights and using natural light, watching the way I use my computers, promoting handouts that are electronic rather than printed out on paper, scheduling office hours electronically so students don't have to get in their cars, waste gas, come to campus, find a parking spot, and all of that. So we're doing this program, and so far we have about, I'm going to say 30 to 40 professors and staff members that have been certified. And we give them a logo that they can place on their office door, as well as on their syllabi. And we also survey their students at the end of the semester to see what the students think of this green teaching. And so part of this certification program is to build a community where we share resources. So one of the resources that we promise our green teachers is a curriculum that is sustainable focused. And what better way than to promote the SDGs, the teaching of the SDGs to those people who are part of that program. The final inspiration is the hashtag #TeachSDGs on Twitter. I'm going to promote Twitter in this webinar, not so that you can post, what you had for breakfast and your personal stuff. You can use Twitter in a professional capacity. You can have a Twitter handle and you never have to tweet a thing. You can just lurk. I would highly suggest that you Google hashtag #TeachSDGs and then just put in Twitter. You'll be able to see what people are doing with the SDGs. And believe it or not, people have been teaching with the SDGs since 2015 when the UN came out with them. And it's an incredible resource. Now, I will give another disclaimer. Most of the teaching of the SDGs is happening on the K through 12 level, not so much in higher ed. But as you can tell from Montgomery College's innovation and in the open community, more people are in higher ed starting to address the SDGs and using them as curriculum based. So those are my 3 inspirations for using the SDGs. Now, what course did I use it in? So I'm an English instructor. As an English instructor, my primary charge is to teach college composition. I might teach a literature class here or there, but most of it is English 121, our gateway course. I've used the online sections to do this project. Now, my course is a ZTC, what we call a zero textbook course. I'm also the facilitator of Howard Open at our campus at Howard Community College. So I'm trying to encourage faculty to adopt open resources or zero curriculum resources rather than these exorbitant cost commercial textbooks. And we all know about the cost of textbooks and what it does to students. That's not the purpose of this webinar, but I'm using the SDGs from the UN as a zero curriculum idea instead of a open, because open would mean that it's everything that I'm using is Creative Commons license. And if you look on the UN website, it's not CC license. However, it's free. So no cost to my students. I'm good with that. So I move on. The other thing that's part of my course is that my course focuses on rhetorical analysis. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but we're basically trying to develop our students as writers that know their audience, know their purpose, know the way that they are actually appealing to their audiences. And that's the decisions they make when they're writing. And then finally, I have a mastery-based approach in my course. So I'm doing a lot in my course, as you can tell. I'm doing a lot of experimenting, and sometimes as an experimenter, I do too much, but that's the case. So my mastery-based approach means this. I have no grades, no points, no averages in my course. Everything is mastery-based, whether they are meeting mastery, nearing mastery, or exceeding the mastery. This is based on Daniel Pink's idea of engagement. And Daniel Pink, in his book, Drive, talks about how people aren't motivated simply by monetary compensation. Although I will say to you, I am motivated by money. But according to Daniel Pink, he says that is not a lasting motivation. And what motivates people? Well, there are three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy means I can make choices about what I do in work and how I operate. So there's agency there. So I try to give my students 100% agency in my course. 2, mastery. If I feel that I have mastered what I'm set out to do, and I know that I'm getting better, I'm improving, that means I am self-efficacious. I have an idea of myself as being good, that I can get better. And that is part of one of my focuses in my pedagogy in my course. And finally,
David?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You have a block of the presenter view the presenter view part is blocking some of the content.
How's that?
Much better. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I apologize. Those are my speaker notes. Okay, so the final thing in my approach is purpose, which is this idea of if I have a clear purpose for what I'm doing in school, in my life, I'm going to be more motivated to do it. Okay, so and we talk about busy work. I see this in my kids' schooling, where they come home with worksheets. And it's really hard for our learner to see a purpose in that when there's no connection to his or her life. Now, in writing, we assume students are going to be like this guy just typing away, and things just pour out of them, and they enjoy the writing process. And we've decried the way students write, or the lack of skill. And I'm being very affected right now by John Warner's book, Why They Can't Write. And in that book, John Warner says, I'm not concerned about students' basic writing skills. Put students in the right situations and they will write clearly, persuasively, even beautifully. But what students are asked to do in school rarely showcases them at their best. We have students who are highly literate in many ways, but we do not allow them to translate that literacy into the kind of writing that reflects the underlying values of humanistic study. Writing is a process that allows us to think and respond to the world at large. It must be open and exploratory, an act where we determine what we mean to say by attempting to say it. Increasingly, writing is a public and even collaborative act, but school often keeps ideas walled off from the world, shared only between student and teacher. That is such a cool quote. So the idea here is that most of our students that come into my class are used to writing for an assignment, submitting it to Canvas, getting it graded, and then it dies at the end of the course. And this is what Montgomery College is trying to do as well, meaning renewable assignments are assignments that actually improve the outer world, not just sit in a classroom and die. And there's really something to be said for that. Warner goes on to quote a student who talks about why school sucks. And in this blog posting, this student wrote, why school sucks. Hint, it's not because it's boring. She says, there's something about having a question and finding the answer that satisfies me. But what really excites me to the core is being able to do something with that answer. That is such a cool quote as well. So this idea of giving purpose to the student, and the SDGs fit into that environment. Now, I'm also going for a natural critical learning environment. I quote this often from Ken Bain in his book, Understanding Great Teaching. And this is so clear to me about learning and motivation. Human beings are most likely to learn deeply when they're pursuing questions or problems that they've come to regard as important, intriguing, or beautiful. I love that. And so what am I doing here in my pedagogy? I'm trying to use the pedagogy of empathy for my students to say to them, I'm going to give you 100% agency to create the learning that you want to create. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm still online learning, Maryland Online, quality matters. You got to have everything. I get it. But the point here is in that order of our curriculum, in those modules where we have step 1 all the way to step 10, we might be missing something, which is what are we asking our students to do? Are they pursuing the problems that we think are important or that they think? And so I'm not crazy. I don't have this, you know, we're just going to go in there and write whatever the heck we want. But I'm giving them 17 goals that they can pursue their interest. And that is key for me moving into that. So how do I introduce the SDGs to students? Well, I do have a document in my class about why we study or participate in the SDGs. I want them to know the why. And in that document, I do tell them that these SDGs are universal goals for all people. They're inherently global in nature. Learning about them will help you as a student develop insights into issues that impact your world, such as lack of access to clean water, gender equality, all of these things. These are inseparable from your life as a student. So if you truly understand the SDGs, you're going to learn about the world that has them. And in so doing, you're going to hopefully be reflecting characteristics of a global student, a global citizen who's active in their communities. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do. The second thing that I'm doing is I'm also approaching writing from a genre-based pedagogy. Now, genres are all forms of writing. Now, if you think about it, what are they used to in an academic setting? Oh, probably the 5-paragraph essay, correct? An academic essay where they make an argument, right? This is not reflective of the outside environment that they live in. Very rarely will they be hired by a boss who will say, I need a 5-paragraph essay on my desk by Monday. It's not happening that way. So what I'm saying to them is, let's think about genres, the genres you're familiar with, and let's write in those types of forms. So why write in genres? Because there's a whole lot of options out there in the world that's not in the captivity of the classroom. Let's go out in the wild. And let's talk about internet memes and proposals and emails and other things that we write for, Facebook updates, Instagram postings. All of these are making arguments and all of them use rhetoric. And so I create this learning environment in the classroom that looks at all of these things that exist outside of the classroom. One of the things I do is I create a Canvas module to actually introduce the SDGs to them and give them some resources. And so I create a Canvas module that says, here are the whys, here are what these SDGs are all about. And then we move into, well, what do we do with them in the curriculum? All right, and so what you're seeing on your screen now is the rhetorical situation. And this happens anytime you write and many times when you speak, all right? So I'm trying to get them to understand the interconnection and relationships between them as the writer, their subject, their audience. And in those circles, we also have what kind of text they're using, what's their purpose, what are they trying to do to their audience. And that's what rhetoric really is basically you doing something to garner a reaction or some action from your audience, okay? What I've done is I've taken the Sustainable Development Goals and I put them in as my subject. So now every piece of writing in my course must address one of the 17 goals, but I don't care which ones they choose. They could choose whichever ones they want, but as long as there is some connection to these goals. So basically, I now have a curriculum that is multifaceted, agile, and globally centric, which is pretty cool, okay? But I'm not forgetting that this is an English 121 composition course. One of the standards of mastery that I want my students to be able to use is this idea of the rhetorical situation. And what is mastery? Let me define what mastery is. Mastery is not simple regurgitation of content on a standardized exam or a standardized essay. Mastery is when I, as the learner, can take the content and use it cogently in other new environments and for new purposes. Yeah, and that's really cool. So it's not just being able to write the perfect essay that has good structure and hardly any grammatical mistakes. Yeah, but what is the damn thing doing? What are we trying to do with our writing? And that is where the SDGs come into play. Now, the specific thing I do in my curriculum, and again, I am a hack, you can do whatever you want to do, but this is how I do it. I go to TED Talk. Again, copyrighted information, TED Talks, I can't manipulate them, however, free to the student. So I'm still zero. There's nothing, no cost for my student in instructional materials. I use 3 TED Talks, and those 3 TED Talks, you see the one on your screen, Michael Green. I also use the global food waste scandal. And I also do a TED Talk about empower a girl, transform a community. That's from Kenya Ntaya. And she talks about the building a school for girls in Kenya. So I use these 3 TED Talks, kind of like my centers, my anchors. And in those, the first thing my students must do is annotate the media, annotate the video, all right? After they annotate, they then interact with each other in discussions. And this could work on an online, in a face-to-face, whichever one. Then I ask them my scaffolding, right? I'm building on their skills here. The second thing they must do is a research summary on some topic that they find within the TED Talk. Now, with doing that summary, I ask them that they must go to our electronic databases from our library and choose an article that is written about one of the topics, like food waste, okay? And then they have to summarize it. So I'm still getting my curriculum of composition and using sources ethically and appropriately and documenting and citing, but they're writing about something that they hopefully are starting to become interested in. As we move through the course, I pepper them with reflection journal entries, and in that I'm asking them to tell me about their learning journey and tell me about what they are developing as writers. What are they interested in? And then finally, everything is genre-based in my course. So let's go to the genre-based, the more of the major essays. All right. One of my first assignments is where I ask them to analyze a genre, any genre you want. And you see them listed here. You can choose a podcast, an internet meme, a TED Talk, a YouTube video, anything you want, but it has to deal with the 17 SDGs, one of those 17. And I'm giving you on the screen an example of some of the genres that my students have chosen to analyze. Now, when they analyze these genres, they're still using the elements of rhetoric. What is the author doing here? How is the author appealing to her audience? What rhetorical appeals is the author using to get the reaction from the audience of this genre? All right, and some of these are here. So you see Girls of the Wild, that's gender equality. Then you see the cartoon with the capital inundated with water. That's more of climate action. And then you've got the reduced inequalities with equality versus equity. That's an internet meme that a student used. And so I'm trying to get them to look outside of the course into what are the arguments and the genres that live outside of the course and make those types of decisions and analyzing how the composers of those genres made those decisions. Now, after I do that, I then say, you're going to do it yourself. So my next major assignment with the SDGs is for them to actually create their own genre piece. Now, a genre piece is very creative, right? So I'm not grading and assessing major academic essays here. I'm basically assessing their creativity. However, I ask them to write a composer statement that is an adjunct to their genre piece. And in that composer statement, they explain what they were trying to do in their genre piece. What were the elements of rhetoric that they were using? What was their purpose? Who was their audience? What were the rhetorical appeals? What was some of the outside resources they used to build ethos, the credibility? And here are some of the things that my students have created last month for this assignment. And I see one here on the screen, which is the timeline. This student went to TikTok, is a free timeline creator. She created a timeline of food waste in the United States. The dolphin is the word cloud. This student used life below water, and she created a word cloud about that topic. And then I have a drawing of a student that talks about the Paris Agreement and how what are the effects of pulling out of that Paris Agreement or not meeting the commitments that were made at the Paris Agreement. And that is her drawing. So I'm letting my students create about things that they find interesting or they find meaningful or even beautiful. And some of these things are really, really good. Again, I'm trying to go back to John Warner and say, what we ask students to do in school rarely exhibits and reflects their abilities. And so some of these here, the word cloud, these proposals, short stories are all very interesting. What is it doing for me as an instructor? I'm not reading 25 to 45 boring essays about something that I already know. So it's rejuvenating my own approach to assessment and my own learning in the course, which is pretty cool, okay? This is actually an outcome from one of my students. Now, I am in my experimental mode, right? So I'm still not done the semester. I still have had problems with these SDGs, you know, with making sure that students understand what I'm trying to go for. But one of my students is now ending her semester and writing a researched argument, which is our last major project. And she sent me this email, which to me warmed my heart, right? Basically gave me a smile that says, wow, that's really cool. That actually happened. And of course, I'm cherry picking. In any presentation, anyone who gives you student comments, they're only going to choose the good ones. So this is a cool one where she talks about inequalities in education. That was one of her SDGs. And she wants to expand a previous argument that she made in her genre piece, because she genuinely enjoys researching this topic. That to me is it in a nutshell. If I fall flat on my face for the rest of the semester, I will walk away with this email and say, I got a little victory. There was a little bit of victory here. And this is exactly what I'm trying to do for my students, to find what they're interested, find the purpose behind what they're doing. And that taps into the motivation. And we all know that motivation is the #1 element that has to be present for deep learning to occur. Has to. If we're not motivated, we're not learning. And so this was one of the outcomes that I really like. Now, another outcome is that hopefully my students and I are building a community of practice. And I usually use this slide for an OER presentation that I do, but instead of the 0 OER content, what's the anchor for both of us in this community are the SDGs. And so we are building a community of practice around these sustainable development goals in that we are working with a breathing, living curriculum, not something stuck in a textbook that's just dead. We're actually looking at things that are occurring right now as we speak. That's really interesting. And what's also interesting is how the students connect with the SDGs as well. When I'm getting a writing about poverty and students are using their own personal anecdotes about how poverty has impacted their life, really cool. And it makes me feel better because I have 0 costs for a textbook. So instead of wasting money on a textbook, my students can take that money and hopefully buy food for their family, pay rent, whatever they need to do. Okay? What are some possible future things that we could do with the SDGs? Now, these are things that I might want to try in the future. The top 2 I really like, and I think I'm going to go with one of these 2. Problem-based learning and project-based learning. Very similar, both learning approaches take a problem, question, a challenge, and ask the students to go ahead and solve it, come with a resolution, come with some type of formula for success that will take care of the problem. Now, I like this because problem-based learning and project-based learning can be semester-long projects, collaborative projects. I really like that. What I've done in my current course is done little pinpricks of SDGs, right? Little shots. I'd rather have students choose and gather around one of the 17 goals and then go ahead and deeply learn about that goal and deeply produce a product that we can bring out of it. And this can be fit into the genre approach, right? So one of my students wrote a letter that could be sent to a congressman, his local congressman, about climate action and what we are doing in the state of Maryland to address that issue. That is a pretty cool product. But if I could have placed that into a project-based learning project where he's working with other students, they could actually get something that could be sent to the congressman, actually mailed to them. The third thing that is a future possibility, and this is what Montgomery College has done, is the interdisciplinary nature of the SDGs. If you look at the 17 SDGs, I don't see a discipline that could not use one of these 17. And so what we can do is build learning communities between disciplines and use the SDGs as our focus point. I could see taking my composition course and pairing it with a philosophy course and talking about the ethics of the SDGs, the ethics of global citizenry, the moral compulsion we have to leave this world in a better shape for our children and our grandchildren. So there are a lot of possibilities there as well. Another one is a campus-wide initiative, and this is happening with an organization called ASHE, and that's the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And in ASHE, if you join, it's free to join that, that organization. You can, as an institution, apply into their STARS program, and that STARS program is basically an assessment project where your actual institution can either get gold, bronze, platinum level of sustainability focus. And in that initiative, not only is it your campus and what you're doing with recycling and all that, but in part of that initiative are sustainable courses. And sustainable courses have at their core one of or some of these goals that are from the UN. A sustainable course that focuses on a topic that is in one of the 17 SDGs. And that's what we're trying to do at Howard Community College in our green teaching certification program, is to actually encourage faculty to place inside their curriculum sustainability awareness. And we can call them sustainable courses. And that is a great way of reporting out and kind of making your institution distinct from others. And finally, collaboration with the local community. We have a thriving, very healthy service learning area in our at our college, but I can see a lot of collaboration with your institution, with your service learning area, getting students to engage with the local community based on their understanding of the 17 SDGs. And so there's a lot of future possibilities here that can, you know, move ourselves to start focusing on some of these global concerns. And the cool thing is you don't have to totally transform a course. I could see a math professor using one module in his or her course based on one of these goals. For instance, they could do a statistical analysis of poverty and what poverty does to people psychologically, mentally, socially, all of that. And so there can be smaller projects. It doesn't have to be this grand transformation. And of course, that's what I did in my course. I just went for the whole shebang and I just said, let's just do it. And, but I can see paring it back a little bit and focusing a little bit more deeply as my discipline, predicts and what my discipline actually is driving me to do. For instance, if I'm teaching some type of a health science, right? If I'm doing, I don't know, dental hygiene, the dental hygiene students have to know how to clean teeth, obviously. We have to have them doing that skill. But why not pair that skill with what are some of the effects of a lack of dental hygiene in some of these communities and countries? What does it do for those students when they're sitting in class and they have the effects of a lack of dental hygiene? So there are some ways that we can actually pepper this into our disciplines. Finally, what are some resources for SDGs? When you get this presentation, and if you click on this image, I'm just going to do it now. Okay. Let's see, new share, and I'll share it. Okay. You'll see this, this presentation that I built for resources, and I'm just going to go through here. I give you some information. Here are some videos that can be used in your classes, but here is the core websites that I've used and are really, really good for teaching and basically saying to yourself, how can I use these SDGs in my curriculum? Believe it or not, the last website, the last bullet here, projects organized by SDGs, I found that last night on Twitter under the hashtag Teach SDGs. And that's basically a website that takes all of the 17 goals and gives you some curriculum ideas for using them. So that's really cool as well. Let me just make sure I'm sharing here. Back to this. Okay. So if you want to look further, again, in my disclaimer, I am not an expert. There could be 10 times, 10 things that I'm doing wrong that you could do better in your course. Again, I'm just telling you about the transformative power of using these SDGs in my class and what I've seen in my students. And I'm still getting, I'll be collecting their final course reflections where they talk about what they've learned. And I'm really excited to read through those and see what the impact of focusing on the SDGs as our core curriculum has had on their learning, which is going to be interesting to look through. Okay, so once you get this presentation, you click on that image, you can go to that other resource that that shows you some of the websites that I'm using and some of the resources that I'm using as well. Okay, so I am done with that. If you have any questions that you just want to ping me offline, there's my email address. I also have my Twitter handle there, and there is the link, tinyurl.com/teachsdgs, the link to this presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Wendy.
That was fantastic. That's a lot of information.
Yeah, sorry.
No, my gosh, no. That's why we send people the slides afterwards so they can go back and process. If this is a small enough group, if anyone would like to ask a question, you can either type in, or if you'd like to just unmute yourself, go right ahead and jump in. I have one little one, but I don't want to put that in until I give everyone else a chance. Everyone's just processing. Oh, here we go. Oh, no, just a thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I do want, well, let me ask my quick question. Oh, I'm sorry. Nikki asked, what is your biggest challenge using the SDGs in your course?
The psychological concept where too many choices freezes a student. And so with the 17 SDGs, some of my students do become, or at least this is what I've observed, they became a little bit overwhelmed with which of the 17 that they would like to use in their genre piece and all that. So what I would say is that my biggest challenge is to help students choose the right goal for their knowledge base and their interest base. Sometimes students can be interested in 5 of the goals and they have to pare it down, and that kind of freezes them. And so they become paralyzed by the freedom of choice. So sometimes they're so used to being dictated to what they're going to write about. Sometimes having it choice-centric can stop some of my students up a little bit. So yeah, that's the biggest challenge I've had.
I suspect you're going to have that unless everyone starts doing these kinds of project-based or giving these choices to the students, because
absolutely
everyone's going to be used to that. So
yeah, absolutely.
My quick question about the resources that you just showed, and I'm pretty sure that I know the answer to this, but just to verify, all of that is shareable, Commons license?
No, so I'm going with zero. Yeah, great question. So the resources that I gave you are either on YouTube, they're TED Talks, they're websites to other places. These are all probably under copyright. There might be some that are under Creative Commons, but no, the goal of my experiment with the SDGs was not to look for only open resources. It was basically to look for zero cost resources for my students. Yeah. So so if they're using the UN's website to do research or electronic, article in our electronic databases, this is cost to the institution, but it's not a cost to the student, and I'm okay with that. So yeah, I'm zero centric. I wouldn't say that this is a total open Creative Commons licensed project.
Okay. All right, that's good enough. And Amelia asked, how do you grade the creative projects that students do?
Great question. So my assessment technique is a little bit different. What I'm doing with students is, so here's what I've learned. Students can learn without grades. They cannot learn without feedback. And so as I assess those genre pieces, I assess them with feedback, meaning I look at their composer statements and say, okay, this was your targeted audience. When I look at your genre piece, then I ask the question, has this student adequately addressed this audience? And that gives me a kind of foundation where I can assess whether it's meeting mastery, not meeting mastery. But I rarely will assess the level of creativity of their created pieces. And this is what I tell them. If you don't create a genre piece or a product that you haven't really thought through and taken the time, your composer statement is going to be underdeveloped, right? And so the strength of the genre piece affects the strength of the composer statement. And that's what I can kind of assess in my wheelhouse as a composition instructor. But yeah, I'm only giving feedback. They're getting 1 grade at the end of this semester, this course, and I'm going with their consistency of mastery as well as the last piece of evidence. And so for me, all of these creative pieces are just saying, David, here's the evidence of my mastery in this course. And I'm then taking that and giving them feedback to improve or feedback about what occurred so that they can take that information and hopefully it helps them inform them of the next thing that they're doing in the course. I hope that answered the question.
David, this is Julie. I have a question about your work in SDG and the overall student experience at Howard Community College. I'm thinking, a student comes into your course and has a highly energizing, individualistic experience with excellent feedback, which I am guessing is probably more work to give than traditional grades.
Absolutely.
Then they go to over to Professor Smith's class,
right?
And have kind of an ordinary, more traditional, more run-of-the-mill class experience. Does the student get whiplash from all this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Julie. So what I've learned is this, and this is basically anecdotal. There's no science. I'm not a scientist. There's no science behind this. But what I found anecdotally from students is that when they go and they leave a learning environment that happens in my course and they go to a more traditional minded course, that does not mean that they cannot approach that course with the same values that they've exercised in my course. So what that means is I've had students say, yeah, I'm in a course right now and it's not like this, but I'm changing the perspective of my own as a learner. So I'm not gonna focus on the grade so much. I'm gonna focus on actually learning this deeply. And I'm gonna be motivated because I'm gonna find questions and challenges that I find meaningful rather than I'm not going to do this assignment in this course simply for the grade. And that's a huge transformation because students are very, very used to playing the game of school. And the game of school is point accumulation, grades, GPAs, and that basically is my certification of learning. And we all know that grades are communicators of what happened. They are not good reflections of mastery. The difference here is between an 81 and an 88. If you can find me a professor that can tell me the distinction between an 81 and an 88, I'm all ears. But for me, it's the feedback that is critical. Now, what that means then, if they're in a course and they're not getting that level of feedback, that doesn't mean they can't exercise self-mastery and self-assessment and self-evaluation. So part of it, I guess, Julie, is teaching them the metacognitive skills to think about their learning and think about themselves as learners. And hopefully that little piece of information will give them the confidence to walk into more of these traditional-minded courses where they lose 5 points if they turn in a paper 1 day late, which is total compliance. It's not learning, it's rewarding compliance and punishing lack of compliance. To me, that is not the greatest environment for learning. But if they can change the lens through which they see these other courses, I'm okay with that. And I think that. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, yeah, we do need, I think, a college-wide approach to these SDGs. And I think this is what we're trying to do with these sustainable courses at Howard Community College. But yeah, curriculum is great, but if the teaching and the pedagogy is not changed with that curriculum, these two are in conflict.
Thank you. That's a very heartening answer, and it could be analogous to an inoculation. Once they've been inoculated against ever viewing teaching and learning in dull, uncreative ways again, they can go forward and survive.
That's right. That's right. Because one of our goals at the institution is promote lifelong learning, and lifelong learning happens why? Through motivation. And so, yeah, if we can get our students motivated to learn and to find answers to questions they find meaningful, yeah, that's great. I think we've succeeded.
Any other questions? So you can either take yourself off mute or type. All right. Well, again, David's very accessible. So if you have questions that you think of later, I am sure he would be happy to receive an email, or if you have my email, I can forward you the questions. David, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Again, demonstrating why you're one of my favorite presenters. If everyone, again, if you will be getting the recording and the slides sent to you. And if you have any follow-up questions or suggestions for future webinars, please let us know. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Wendy.